Russia's air defenses can't catch a break right now. The very things that they're supposed to be stopping keep on hitting them, leaving massive gaps in the skies that Ukraine can exploit. You can probably guess what we're about to tell you next. Ukraine just struck again. More of Russia's air defenses are in ruins. This was an awe-inspiring series of strikes that created a remarkable 48 hours for Ukraine. Russia's unstoppable weapons have proven anything but, and Vladimir Putin is left wondering where it all went wrong. January 15th saw several outlets report on Ukraine's 48 hours of devastation. Defense Express was among them, and it reports that the unmanned systems forces of the armed forces of Ukraine managed to destroy a shocking 6 units of air defense systems and radar stations within 2 days, with all of those systems and radars being within the occupied regions of Ukraine. Specifically, Ukraine hit 3 systems or radars each in the embattled Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, in both cases potentially creating safe aerial corridors in those regions for future strikes. Confirmation of all 6 strikes came from the infamous commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy. The commander, who goes by the call sign Magyar, took to Telegram to announce what Ukraine has pulled off in its 2-day strike extravaganza. SBS birds took out 6 SAM and radar units from the Worm air defense system in 48 hours, using middle strike means in the operational depth of the occupied territories of Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, Magyar blared on the social media platform. He also provided a list of the 6 systems that Ukraine destroyed, which we'll get to in a moment, and he explained, in his own inimitable way, which of Ukraine's drone units conducted the strike. Courtesy visits were made by the birds of the 412th Nemesis SBS Brigade in coordination with the newly created Deep Construction Center of the SBS Group during 48 hours on January 12th to 14th, 2026, he said. Courtesy isn't the word that Russia would use for these drone visits. Catastrophe seems like a better choice. Brovdy's mention of the middle strike drones deserves some more attention. According to United 24 Media, all of the drones that struck Russia's air defenses between January 12th and 14th fall into the middle strike category. The drones had operational depths ranging from 46 to 160 kilometers, or 28.5 to 99.4 miles, which places them in an interesting place where they can hit targets that Ukraine's short-range first-person view or FPV drones can't, but can't travel far enough for them to strike targets inside Russian territory. That's the entire point. Much has been made about Ukraine's use of drones during the war. The effects of FPV drones are clear. Ukraine has been using them to form massive walls of drone defenses that pick off Russian forces as they attempt assaults, in addition to using them in seek and destroy operations, where these types of drones have become terrifying aerial hunters. And the approach is working like a treat for Ukraine. As Forces News reported on January 15th, as many as 80% of the 415,000 casualties that the UK's Ministry of Defence reported that Russia suffered in 2025 were caused by attack drones. On the long-range front, Ukraine has been developing drones capable of flying as far and sometimes further than many cruise missiles. Again, the effects have been clear for all to see. Ukraine's targeting of military sites inside Russia, along with its constant hits against oil refineries and other energy infrastructure, has cost Russia massively. In August, the Kyiv Independent reported that the Ukrainian military's Strategic Communications Department had estimated that such long-range strikes had cost Russia $74.1 billion, amounting to 4.11% of the country's gross domestic product during the first 8.5 months of 2025 alone. Ukraine has plenty of drones dealing death to Russians on and around the combat lines. It's also building impressive stockpiles of long-range drones that allow it to keep the pressure piled onto Putin's war machine inside Russia. What Ukraine didn't have, at least until fairly recently, was middle strike drones that allow it to attack the Russian rear in occupied Ukraine. FPV drones couldn't travel far enough to do that particular job, and they're needed for the defensive drone walls that Ukraine has created. Long-range drones could do the job, but these valuable weapons are better reserved for hitting Russia on its own turf. Middle strike drones were needed, and the strikes between January 12th and 14th, along with Brovdy's commentary, show us that Ukraine has plugged this particular gap in its aerial arsenal. Some, including the Centre for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, have pointed to Ukraine's past lack of middle strike drones as a potential issue. In a January 6th article, CEPA discussed how Ukraine's FPV drones are impressive enough to have created a kill zone that stretches between 15 and 20 kilometers, or 9 and 12 miles, beyond the combat lines. But those kill zones exist to destroy Russian armor and infantry as they progress toward the front. That's an effective approach, but as CEPA says, it isn't decisive. In what might feel like a rare case of Russia learning from the many, many mistakes that it's made during the war, the country has managed to adapt to Ukraine's FPV drone kill zones. Throughout 2025, Russia adapted and learned from its mistakes, narrowing Ukraine's early drone advantage by accepting heavy infantry losses and relocating critical assets deeper behind the front line, Sieper explains, before adding, "Artillery, air defense, and command and control nodes have been moved beyond the range of most short-range strike systems and provided with dense electronic warfare protection. These are all high-value targets that were being placed out of the reach of Ukraine's FPV drones, but weren't quite valuable enough for Ukraine to use its more expensive long-range drones, when those weapons could do more financial or logistical damage to Russia elsewhere. Hence the need for middle strike drones. With the category of drones that sit between the FPV drones and long-range behemoths that Ukraine already has, opportunities to expose and tear through the Russian rear in occupied Ukraine became possible. The logic is simple. When Ukraine has drones that can take out artillery stationed in the rear, it destroys weapons that would otherwise be bombarding Ukraine's forces with shells. When command and control nodes are taken out, Russia's forces on the front lose what little semblance of organization they had, making them easier for Ukraine to pick off. And the more air defense systems that go down, the more of these middle strike assaults Ukraine can launch, which weakens the Russian rear and perhaps even makes pushbacks against entrenched occupying forces more viable. Speaking of hitting air defenses, let's return to the 6 systems that Ukraine destroyed between January 12th and 14th. Brovdi provides a full list in his Telegram post, starting with a Tor surface-to-air missile or SAM system. The system was hit in the Mariupol district of Donetsk. Missile Threat describes it as a SAM system that has an engagement range of between 12 and 16 kilometers or 7.4 to 9.94 miles, making it something of a short-range system. Tor is ground-based and mobile, and it's capable of delivering missiles packed with 15 kilogram or around 33-pound high-explosive fragmentation warheads. Tor is a Soviet-era system, having been introduced into service in 1986, and it specializes in tracking incoming aircraft, helicopters, and precision-guided munitions. Next on the list, Ukraine stuck with the Mariupol district to hit a Vityaz 50N6E radar station. Used by the S-300V Vityaz 50RG medium-range mobile air defense missile system, the Vityaz 50N6E is a radar capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously, though it locks on to maximum 8 for engagement and can dedicate 2 missiles per target. It's the eyes of an air defense system that Army Recognition says is basically a replacement for Russia's older S-300PS systems. The system uses 9M96 missiles, which were designed for the S-400 but are compatible with the S-350E. Those missiles can supposedly hit unspecified aerial and ballistic targets at ranges between 1.5 and 120 kilometers, or 0.93 and 74.5 miles, at altitudes of between 10 and 30,000 meters, or 32.8 to about 98,425 feet, depending on the variant. Now, we're not saying that Russia is lying here, but if the missile specs for the S-350E are accurate, and the Vityaz 50N6E radar station is both part of that system and is capable of tracking targets in the same altitude range as the missile can supposedly hit, then Ukraine's incoming drone shouldn't have stood a chance. The radar should have detected them, and the S-350E's missiles, which can apparently confront ballistic threats, should have been more than fast enough to take them down. But that's not what happened. Ukraine scored a direct hit on the radar station, meaning that the S-350 to which it was connected is now probably being forced to fire blind. And when you're dealing with targets as small as drones and missiles, not being able to see what's coming isn't exactly the best situation to be in. The S-350E can probably still fire, it'll just do so blindly, and who knows what its missiles will hit if they don't get lucky and strike a Ukrainian projectile. Moving on, we have the third target that Ukraine hit in the Donetsk region, a Buk M1 SAM system. This time, Ukraine's drones flew to the Volnovakha district of Donetsk to take out a medium-range SAM system that is notable because it takes very little time to set up and move. Army Recognition says that a Buk M1 can be made ready to engage in about 5 minutes, and after engagement, it can be prepared for transit in about the same amount of time. That makes it a difficult system for Ukraine to hit, assuming Russia uses it correctly. A Buk M1 should be able to fire on a target, score a hit, and then quickly be moved to cover to prevent a counterattack. It's not clear if Ukraine conducted a counterattack or had intelligence about where the Volnovakha-based Buk M1 was, but it doesn't matter. Brovdi says that this air defense system is done for thanks to Ukraine's drones. And due to those drones, Ukraine has eliminated an air defense system that has an engagement range of just 32 meters to maximum 32 kilometers, 105 feet to 20 miles. Again, Ukraine's drones shouldn't have been able to pull off this strike, given those reported specs. A missile that can fly as low as a drone at more than the speed of sound should have been enough to prevent the demise of the Buk M1, but it wasn't. It almost feels like the reported specifications for Russia's weapons and what they can actually do don't quite align. No, it couldn't be that, right? Regardless, that's 3 air defense systems and radars downed in Donetsk, but Ukraine was a long way from being done in its 2-day strike fest. Several air defense systems in the Zaporizhzhia region were also on the docket, with all 3 of them being in the Polhiv district of that region. Among them was another Buk SAM system, though Brovdi doesn't specify what type in his report. That means it could be a Buk M1, M2E or M3 that was destroyed in Polhiv. We've already talked about the Buk M1. The other variants of the system offer enhancements that include longer ranges, so Ukraine won big with this 4th strike, no matter which variant it hit. Taking out a Buk M1 is always good news. Taking out one of its more advanced cousins is even better. Brovdi also reports that Ukraine took out another Tor air defense system in Polhiv, though he specifies which type this time. It was a Tor M2 that fell to Ukraine's drones. Army recognition calls this system an upgrade over the base Tor system that Ukraine appears to have hit in Donetsk, and that there are 4 versions of it: the Tor M2, Tor M2E, Tor M2K, and Tor M2KM. The Tor M2E is the export version of the system. That makes it unlikely to have been stationed in Zaporizhzhia, though it's also possible that Russia has started using weapons it previously built to sell, given its many air defense woes. Assuming Russia isn't quite that desperate, Ukraine must have destroyed one of the other 3 variants. Even the basic Tor M2 is an improvement over the previous ones, thanks to its new surveillance radar, which brings with it a minimum range of 1 kilometer or about 0.6 miles. The Tor M2K adds a different kind of wheeled chassis and mounts for a pair of 9M334 missile modules, each of which can hold 4 9M331 missiles. As for the Tor M2KM, it features a modular design that allows for the reduction of the towed version of the missile defense system's weight down to 15 tons. All 3 are impressive systems. Ukraine just took one of them out in Zaporizhzhia. And that leaves us with the last of the 6 air defense systems Ukraine destroyed over the course of 48 hours, starting on January 12th, a Strela 10 SAM system. Another short-range system, the Strela 10 is almost like a tank that happens to carry SAM missiles rather than the traditional turret. It's designed to take out aircraft flying at low altitudes, helicopters, and precision-guided munitions, though Army recognition makes a point to mention that it should also be able to take out drones in its report on the weapon. We know how well that worked out for the Strela 10 in Zaporizhzhia. The system has an engagement range of just 5 kilometers or about 3.1 miles. It also combines the ability to fire up to 8 missiles with a 7.62mm machine gun. An operator can fire at an incoming threat, such as a middle strike drone. While not the most powerful of the SAM systems that Ukraine destroyed during its 2-day blitz of Russia's air defenses, the Strela 10 can serve an important role as an infantry protector that takes out incoming projectiles that would otherwise strike Russia's constantly marching soldiers. Can, but didn't. As if the destruction of these SAM systems and radars wasn't enough to show Russia that the weapons it's built to shoot incoming projectiles out of the sky aren't capable of shooting incoming projectiles out of the sky, Brovdi added that Ukraine also scored a final bonus hit. Defense Express says that Ukraine took out a second Strela 10 air defense system in Zaporizhzhia, which it says was hit by the 413th Regiment of Ukraine's SBS. It all adds up to a pretty damaging 48 hours for Russia, and what these strikes mean for the war is important to note. We've already discussed the importance of middle strike drones due to their ability to hit targets in the Russian rear. However, we didn't touch much on how these drones are perhaps as important to Ukraine's defense as they are to its offense. As David Kirichenko wrote for the National Interest on January 4th, Russia has proven itself more capable of hitting Ukraine's rear than Ukraine has of hitting Russia's during much of the war. Russia has its own middle strike drones, Kirichenko says, and it's used them in conjunction with glide bombs, 3,500 of which it dropped on Ukraine in November 2025 alone, to severely weaken Ukraine's rear. Of course, that has a knock-on effect on the stability of Ukraine's front-line fighters to defend against Russia's constant assault. They strain supply chains, disrupt rotations, and impose high costs on the defenders, Kirichenko writes. Ukraine has precision-guided munitions of its own, along with HIMARS that it can use to hit the Russian rear, but range is always a problem, and Russia moving the assets we mentioned earlier in the video, such as artillery and air defense systems, further back makes them harder for Ukraine's weapons to hit. So middle strike drones, like those used between January 12th and 14th, are set to play a key role in helping Ukraine to redress that imbalance on the battlefield. Now Ukraine can weaken Russia's attacking forces, which relieves pressure on defenders who are already struggling due to Russian attacks on the Ukrainian deep rear. It's almost a tit-for-tat battle, and it's one that Ukraine hasn't been winning for much of the war. As for why it's taken so long for these middle strike drones to appear, Metza's Ilya Volinsky provided an explanation back in October 2025. He said that creating middle strike drones isn't as simple as adapting long-range drone designs to weapons that can operate over shorter distances. Middle strike drones have to be more complex due to the frontline conditions they have to bypass, along with the defenses erected in the Russian rear in occupied Ukraine. Mid-range drones must have target tracking modules, additional types of communication and navigation systems, Volinsky writes, noting that maintaining communication with a drone that has to travel more than 30 kilometers while under full control of an operator has been a major challenge for Ukraine. But in 48 hours, Ukraine proved that it had overcome that challenge. What this means for Russia is that its rear is now vulnerable. Assets that it had moved back enough to avoid FPV drones are now back in Ukraine's range. That leaves Russia with two options. Either it keeps those assets where they are, sacrificing safety for potential utility in the process, or it moves them even further back, resulting in those assets becoming near non-factors on the front lines. Artillery isn't much use when it's stationed 100 kilometers away from the targets it needs to hit. Command and control nodes that are forced back that far can't truly oversee the assaults they exist to coordinate. Ukraine now has a type of drone that can hit hard and cause serious damage to Russia. The future will likely bring many more middle strike drone attacks that weaken Russia all across the war's combat lines. But don't think for a second that the arrival of middle strike drones for Ukraine is going to stop the country from launching its massive long-range assaults on Russia. On January 14th, we reported on a catastrophic hit that broke the spine of Russia's military. Ukraine hit a drone production facility, and one that makes middle strike drones for Russia, in a devastating attack that showcased the strength of the country's domestically made missiles. Find out more about that strike in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest strikes against the Russian rear. And thank you as always for watching.